It is a great honor for me to introduce you to all the next generation internet projects. We had Fabrizio with us earlier today. He introduced what this program is. It's an EU program aiming at promoting people-centered internet, focusing on human needs and challenges such as security, trust, inclusion, and it needs to reflect the rules and values that the citizens enjoy. We have our speakers with us today, and they will be explaining their projects. I will start off with a sentence by Fabrizio that I liked very much. Internet is a common good that's just like climate. We're all aware of it, but we need to act. We have a sample of 400 projects funded by the EU. There are 11 next-generation internet projects in 3 panels. In the first panel, we have our first 3 speakers. Paul Theyskens from MyGlobal Data, Almudena from 5GEpicentre, and Régis, who will be presenting the eSSIF-LAB project. We're going to watch a video now.
Difficult.
Bueno, pues el primer ponente de este panel es Paul Theyskens.
So the first speaker of our panel is Paul Theyskens. He's the MyGlobal project founder, and that moved from a non-profit organization to become the cornerstone of the sector in Europe and the whole world. Paul, you have 7 minutes to explain your project.
Everybody hear me? Yes. Hi, my name is Paul Theyskens. I am, since 25 years, I'm a web developer. So that means I'm an internet architect, and I've worked, had my own agency back in '96 when the internet was young and we didn't have internet broadband at home yet. And then after the agency, I worked in telco, I worked in media. And so when media came, then social media came, and we had some European examples, like 2007, 2010, that were very successful. But then Facebook came, and Facebook ruled all, and it destroyed the other social MySpaces kind of networks. And so at that moment, we said, well, we see that the internet, as discussed this morning also by our colleague from the UN, we see that the internet is a continuous improvement environment. And so what we are lacking today, and that's why a number of people within my data have started the movement, we are lacking a personal data infrastructure. So actually the internet was built for companies, it was built for users, but actually the data and all the infrastructure was owned by governments, by companies, by institutions. And so we need to build this human-centric internet where the actual humans can take control of the data that is flowing around them. And that's how my data 10 years ago got started as a research project. And so today it's a large organization. It's an NGO in Finland. And we currently have a number of business, legal, technology, and societal work groups that work around how is the next generation technology going to be implemented, how do we make it societal impact relevant, and also we are discussing with the European Commission. We are one of the experts that give input on this new law, the Data Governance Act, for instance, that is coming up, the AI Act, which is all about our future and how we're going to make that AI ethical, and that's in part the MyData organization as an introduction. So what we also want to do is, if we look at big tech today, a lot of the things that were said today are true. We see that, for instance, it's 70% of the internet is indeed US. We only have 4% in Europe. We only have 7 large internet companies, like ADN and others, and Spotify. And so we kind of missed the boat on the first stage of this development, and big tech is ruling the world. Also because big tech, and that's what I think is important, has been user-centric from the start. So they decided on, okay, what is the problem that we need to solve? And then they created things like Google Maps and Waze, which was completely user-centric. And now we see that, of course, they have 95% of all users in mobility navigation on smartphone with Waze and Google Maps. This is the way to do it, to be user-centric. So what we say in MyData is we need to go in that same route. We need to build like big tech. And that's, so maybe on the next slide. What you see here is an example of what we're trying to do with MyData. We set up an infrastructure, a personal data store for every individual that he can manage themselves, in which he can actively share what he is doing with whoever that data interests. And so instead of talking about media apps and Facebook and Google and trying to protect what's happening there, we develop new things. We look at our mobility profile. We look at our profile as an individual towards my job, my finances. We focus on the family budget, which today has a number of problems we can solve on energy, which is a big problem today, as you all know, in Europe, but also mobility. In average European country, mobility is 15% of our family budget. So we want to do something, and we want to do something by doing innovation projects. This project is a test and experimentation facility for AI. We just got granted. We will set up pilots for data sharing, including personal data of where we walk, where we bike, where we, the data of our car, which also belongs to us, and the data of the trucks and every mile that is being driven in a specific city, to enable a testing and experimentation facility, a living lab, like the lady from Malaga said this morning, to be able to experiment with that data, sharing it not only GDPR compliant, but even more focusing on what benefit do I get if I have a budget of, let's say, 15% of my family budget that I spend on mobility in a car, in public transport, in shared bikes, in whatever. If I can profile myself and I can set up that data, that is basically what we are trying to set up. And so MyData is a development community who is actively building those components. Today, we see that the European Commission and European innovation is also moving towards from research to actual implementation, because our sustainable development goals of Europe are only around the corner. We have a vision of 2030 when we want to be zero emission all over Europe. So it means that the urgency of innovation becomes more urgent to go faster. And so that's why MyData is participating in this kind of projects for testing. And what was also important is that maybe we can show the next. What is also important is that it is experimented in a local ecosystem. This is an example of what our colleague from the NGI initiative introduced this morning. Which is important is that we are now moving towards what we call the commons. The commons becoming something where actually we realized over the last 10 years that people, everybody says people have to manage their own data, but actually nobody's doing that. So what we see as MyData is that there is a need for a cooperative. There's a need for some, we call it a fiduciary, like an accountant that does that for me as an individual. And so now this data commons and data cooperatives are being experimented. This is an example from the UK. Cambridge is leading in that, where they set up a data commons in which both the community of the fishing village and every inhabitant, they produce a data trust which has all of the data, not just of the citizens and their city and their houses and their CO2 profile of the houses, but also about the mobility and everything around that city, to try to get to a new business model, to try to experiment with how can we improve that. And that's kind of the things that MyData wants to go towards on the business and technology levels to find that answer, because we haven't found the answer yet. And so for the final slide, I think it's the one before final, to be honest. You see, at MyData, we believe that this personal technology that we all need is something where I can manage all the data, but I'm not going to do it myself, as I said. We need someone to develop the software for us. And we see things like the personal data store, the personal data space, which will connect to the European data spaces, which are now being implemented in Europe over the next few years, and where the data is treated by this organization, Data Trust, Data Cooperative, Data Union, that will, on the basis of having a lot of users doing it for a lot of users, will give me recommendations on how can I save on my energy, on my housing, when do I have to invest in putting solar panels? Is it worthwhile? That kind of technology is now being built, and that's called the personal digital twin. Like the city today, there's a lot of cities who are implementing a digital twin for mobility to manage the traffic flows and to see, okay, we want to go to zero emissions, so they get a dashboard and a tool to manage and to steer the safety in the city. They want to steer the pollution levels. They want to steer the air quality. That kind of thing is now being developed. And so what we do as MyData is connect that personal data to the story of the city and develop it to a next level where it will be implementable in society, and what we believe is a new internet world which will be human-centric. And so as a final slide, as a final thing, we said we believe in order to do that, you have to put a human in the center. You have to be built like big tech, where you study the problem, you identify the first problem, and not in the first problems where we see today, it's our employment, it's our what we make per year, it's our what is the component of our total budget, and the costs of housing, the cost of energy, for instance, is very important. So we focus on that. We see where is that data and how can we improve it by experimenting with that. And after that, because the internet is a continuous improvement platform, we have to evolve to continuously improve that platform, taking into account that the legal platform changes all the time. We have constant changes in legal laws coming up. We have technology changing more rapidly than you can tender out as a project for infrastructure. And so you have a number of these things that you have to take into account in order to get that going. And so what we say is, okay, we're going to build like big tech, continuous improve towards the future. And we see in Europe, there is Gaia X, important collaboration. There's 200 academic institutions, companies working together. Tomorrow I'm going to Data Spaces Day, for instance, Data Spaces Alliance Day in Barcelona. I'm sorry not to be able to be here tomorrow, Yolanda, because I want to congratulate you also with your event. But I think that it is important that Europe to be have their own sovereignty towards this, being part of the economy in the future, the data economy of the future. There are now big steps being taken at the country level. And so MyData is one of those organizations that will help with that. And so if anybody has any questions around that, please go ahead. And that's, I think, I don't know if I take too much time.
Maybe at the end, if we have time, someone can... I have a challenge for you.
Yes.
In one sentence, how do you see the future of next generation internet?
Well, I think that next generation internet has been of enormous help for a lot of startup and young developers and organizations
One sentence.
Sorry?
One sentence.
Yeah, okay. That's a bit of a problem.
That's a challenge.
I think the next generation internet is an enabler of quick and rapid innovation that has more value than sometimes larger projects.
That is perfect. Thank you for sharing, Paul. Nuestra próxima invitada se llama...
Our next guest is Almudena Díaz Zaya. She's from here, from Malaga. She researches here at the University of Malaga. She's part of the 5GEpicentre project, which is a 5G infrastructure project, cloud native, in order to protect against catastrophic situations. You need to go back, rather. Way back. There you go. Hit play, if you can. No? If you can see the play sign underneath at the bottom.
Ahí, dale play.
There you go, if you hit play.
Tu turno, Almudena.
Buenas tardes.
It's your turn, Almudena. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the introduction. Almudena Díaz, a researcher at the University of Malaga, and I'm here to talk about what we do at the 5GEpicentre project. This has been selected by the EU in order to demonstrate the capacities that 5G can bring forward to all the services and applications that are used by first responders in situations of emergency management and risk management. And we talk about PPDR, Public Protection Disaster Relief, and everything has to do with a conservative context. So there are some reluctances that have to do with the adoption of technologies. The technologies that are used in this kinds of context are quite robust, but they do not allow us to grow or to bring together all the technological progresses or advances that can be used for first responses or for PPDR. We cannot have integrated solutions between communications with high-resolution video and with control by drones or remote control, because this is not allowed by the limitations of these kinds of technologies, whereas with 5G, this is possible, and we know that it has more speed, less latency, and there is a radically different position which has to do with the architecture of Internet. It is service-oriented, and on top of that network, we should render services that rely on the capacities that are boasted by the network. and there can be some demands that need to be met in the communication between the fire brigade and the first responders. There's 16 partners. We have large companies like Airbus and smaller companies like the one in Portugal that we're going to talk about later. And all these SMEs that develop applications for PBDR allow us to become more acquainted with the requirements of these kinds of applications. Once we get to know them, we set up the network, we leverage the 5G technologies, we do the deployments of the services. And so a PBDR solution is going to have a terminal, which is going to be used by the first responder. We also have the network that allows us to send the communication between that first responder and the control center. And then we have a server that receives that input data of communication, and it disseminates it among the rest of services. So these are the three touch points. We have, on the one hand, we have the integration in the terminals or devices used by first responders. And in the network, we identify, well, in terms of standards, there is a body that establishes the specifications for 5G. So we identify which are the 5G features that can be applied. 1 minute remaining, okay? Okay, continue, please. We identify which 5G features can be used in order to cater for the needs of the PBDR, for example. Prioritization of traffic, prioritize communication between security forces. Even if we have a huge event of 30,000 people, we need to guarantee that there is this connection. That could be done with the previous technologies, but this is done in a more dynamic manner and in a more user-friendly manner. So we have the companies with the use cases. We have the members that provide us with technological solutions, and we also have research for in Greece and the University of Malaga. And then we also have the experimentation platforms, and we have one in Malaga, in Berlin, Barcelona, Aveiro, and another one in Madrid and Malaga. In the case of Malaga, what we saw in the video is our building, because we have a private 5G network which is made available for those solutions, and we integrate the solution and we show the improvements regarding previous pre-existing technologies. And not only do we have this 5G network that we operate in the building, but also in the street Lario, in the downtown area, we have a deployment with Telefónica, with the local police and the University of Malaga, and we can conduct experimental demonstrations with real users in real life. In November last year, we held an event with the local police of Malaga, and we covered a special parade that was carried out, the Magna Parade, after such a long time in the lockdown without being capable of holding this kind of crowded events. Well, we set up a police control center with 5G exclusive technologies, and we have security cams. We enforce that with 5G cams, and in the control center, we set up a dynamic center in the Lario Street at the center of the event, and we had 5G cameras with high resolution and with fiber connection. So we can do these kinds of demonstrations. In this case, it was video for surveillance, but with other use cases, we can do some other kinds of demonstrations, and I think that's it. But I would also like for you to summarize in one sentence, which do you think is the future of the next generation Internet? How do you perceive the future of Internet? I think that mobile communications and 5G are going to be a key factor in the future of next generation Internet. That's perfect. Thank you very much for sharing your experience. And now we have Régis Hamelin, He's coming from Paris, representing the eSSIF-LAB, the European Lab for Sovereign Identity Framework, talking about digital sovereignty that connects innovators with investors and corporations. You have 7 minutes.
For having me. So I'm Régis Hamelin, I'm CTO of Blumorpho, and I'm here to talk about the eSSIF-LAB project. eSSIF-LAB is a European innovation action. It's supported around, under the Horizon 2020 framework. And the partners are, so the project is led by TNO in the Netherlands, and we also have GRNet for the technical support. Funding Box with Maria, who is here over there, is also part of the consortium. They are dealing with all the financial aspects. And at Blumorpho, what we do the management of innovation. So it's a kind of special project. It's an innovation action. So the purpose is here to develop a framework of components of software to enable the European citizen to take control of their own data. So to have the necessary tools to build a self-sovereign identity. So it's very rare that the European Commission is pushing a technology. So here there's a real motivation for the European Commission to support this new way to master your own data. So how does it work? Basically, you have a wallet. In this wallet, you have your IDs, your personal identification. But it can also be your diplomas, your personal, any kind of important information that you sometimes need to share on the internet. And so we have launched two kinds of call. The first one was the so-called infrastructure call. It was aimed to build the infrastructure, to build the components. And the business open call were projects where we wanted to have a real-life usage of this technology. And it's really about innovation and adoption of this technology by real people and real use case. So there was, on one hand, we build the infrastructure, and on the other hand, we use the infrastructure to build a use case. So, and our job at Blumorpho was to support the companies that have been funded, because it's a cascade funding project, so it means that the Commission is giving money to a consortium so that the consortium can fund projects. So we were supporting the sub-grantees in their innovation strategy, in their commercialization strategy. And what we have found is quite interesting. I will give three examples. Actually, there's one major issue when in this concept, there's a kind of triangle of trust. You have the holder of the credentials. You, as a citizen, you are the holder. You have the issuer and the verifier. The issuer can be a university, which issues a diploma, and the verifier can be your employer that at the end needs to verify if you have the right degree. And these three organizations, so these 3 points in this triangle, needs to be convinced at the same time that this is the technology that they need. So this is a major difficulty. You need to convince, for example, a university, a company, and all of us at the same time that this is the right technology. So it's a major issue in the commercialization. So how can we solve this problem? Actually, there's the standardization is very important, but also, so that's why you've seen that we have contributed more than 100 times to standardization. It was a very important aspect of the project. But also, we believe that regulation is super important. That's why I can mention 2 use cases. The first one is in the UK, and the problem that they had to solve was during the pandemic, they found that there was a need for doctors to move a lot from one hospital to another. And each time that they have to move, they have to prove that they have the right to be there. They have the diplomas to be a doctor. So the verification takes about 2 months. 2 months with travels, paperwork, a very long time. They've calculated that per year is 100,000 hours of time lost for doctors which are not talking to their patients. So to do that, the NHS has launched some tests, and with SSI you can just do the verification in a matter of a few seconds. So it saves time, energy, and CO2 at the end. In that, there are currently some trials, and SSI will be probably one of the technologies that will be used by the NHS. Another example in Luxembourg, for the management of organ donors, you have much more need in organs than you have donors. And maybe in the population, there are people who want to help, and they don't know how to do that. And in fact, the Luxembourg government, which is a city of 800,000 people, they have decided to implement this self-sovereign identity technology. And so it will be up and running at the end of this year. The technology that has been developed in eSSIF-LAB will be deployed in Luxembourg. And it will simplify the consent management of organs donors. Actually, you have 15,000 people who are expecting an organ right now, and maybe only 2,000 people or 5,000 people who have really given their consent when there's much more potential and there's a lot of need. So to solve this triangle of the holder, the issuer, and the verifier, one way to go is also to simplify the system, is to have the issuer and the verifier being the same and one person. And you can find that in companies, in large corporates of more than 4,000, 5,000 people, when you need to manage the training of your employees. Because when you have a large company, they invest a lot into tools for their employees to visit the tools and to check which training is the best for them. But at the end, they don't use it. The employees do not use it. Why? Because they don't want the employer to know what are their weaknesses. So there's a need of anonymization here. And this is really into the interest of the company to have their employees well trained, because the technology is going so fast that today you need, after 5 years out of school, you need to be trained again. So there's a company called WorkPy, which has developed this technology and has adopted a self-sovereign identity to give this kind of anonymization into this kind of tools, into the HR management. So yes, that's 3 examples where I wanted to show you the value of self-sovereign identity. And maybe to conclude, one word from Oscar. Oscar is the CTO of the project at TNO. And he just told me, when I asked him, do you have a message for these people? And he said, okay, the commission has spent 7 million into this project, so use it. So you can see that there's a QR code on top. So if you want to know more about self-sovereign identity, we will be more than happy to connect you to the right people.
Perfect, thank you so much. And the same question for you in one sentence. How do you see the future of next generation?
I was very much inspired by the last talk this morning. So I would like to see, I don't know if it's going to be that, but I would like to see an internet with a purpose.
That's great. ¿Tiempo para una pregunta?
Time for one more question. Perhaps one of you would like to pose a question to one of the panel speakers.
Despertar.
Wake up. There's still one person who has the headset on a really high volume. And do you have any questions? Who would like to break the ice? Or shall we move on to the next one? I'm not angry. Please don't be scared. Liliana.
Yeah, this is related to self-sovereign identities. And so I see basically that there are about 30 projects that have been funded. And I wonder what comes next. Like, how is, especially speaking about interoperability of systems, so if these are 30 separate modules, what are we going to do next, right? So that's the question.
Yeah, the interoperability has been part of a dedicated work in this project. That's why we had so many work into the standardization. And what comes next? The technology is now available in open source. And what comes next is it is part of standard now. And we hope that ADAS2 will consider this technology for the future. And then because ADAS2 will be really critical for the adoption. And if it goes in that direction, then you will have the tools to exploit it.
Pues sin más.
Without further ado, thank you very much to all three of you. It is a pleasure to moderate this session, and we're going to give the floor to the next panel session.
Thank you so much.